All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another amazing, fun, awesome, all the words about the cool things we do here at Negative Space Podcast, panel, whatever you want to call it. Super excited for this one. I've been a fan of this creator for quite a bit, so very excited to have Josh and Matt chat a bit. We don't have too many announcements today, mostly because I don't usually have time to figure out announcements. Biggest one is that our Spaces competition that's open to diverse creators is closing on June 10th. That's about 2.5 weeks away. This is our kind of like Spaces competition is open for diverse and underrepresented creators that are trying to break into comics. We should be announcing 2 more mentors pretty soon, which I'm very excited about. So keep an eye out for that. And another quick announcement is super excited. Just today, one of our pitch competition finalists launched their Kickstarter, Try Not to Die #1. It launched a few hours ago. It's already got like 45 plus backers. It looks awesome. Yeah, Kenneth Lester is the artist on it, writing it with Davian Beckton. It's worth checking out. So launched today. Don't wait on it. I'm pretty sure there's like an early bird special if you go on it today. So don't miss it. I'll throw the link in the chat in a second. Awesome. So that's pretty much all I have. So I'm gonna bring in Josh and get right to it. He's gonna just run with it because tonight's gonna be a fun one. Welcome, Josh, and thank you as always, and have fun.
Thank you, Noel. Welcome back,
David.
everyone. So 2 quick things to mention. As I don't know if you mentioned, I think you did. The Q&A on the Zoom dashboard. Make sure you ask your questions early and often. I get to the questions as soon as possible if they're relevant, or I'll save them to the end. But make sure that you get them in as soon as you have them. Also, if you've missed any interviews, you can catch them all on the Negative Space YouTube channel or on any major podcasting platform, and you can see what's coming up by going to negativespacecomics.com/events. All right, let's get to the conversation for today because it is going to be a great one. Today, we're talking with Matt Emmons. Matt is a comics artist and illustrator living in Philadelphia. Born in the greater Boston area and raised on a healthy diet of 80s monster movies and fantasy novels, he now spends his time drawing monsters and robots for his own books. Matt, welcome.
Hi, hold on. I'm turning my video on. Thank you
You
so
got it.
much for having me.
Of course. So we're going to start where we always do, which is I want to kind of get your creative origin story. What made you want to tell stories in the first place?
I feel like I keep changing this as I go, but I think it started with I got really into Pokemon, and then I found out they're based off of real animals, and then I just started drawing those animals. And so I just, like on reflection, I was like, "Oh, I just didn't have a lot of friends, so I just spent a lot of time in my head." And then it went into I watched movies as a kid. I want to make movies. Oh, it turns out you need a whole team and limitless amounts of money to make a movie. And it turned into I just kept drawing and writing stories in my head until I kind of just figured I like comics and kept chipping away at them. And I don't think I made a finished comic until I was 20, but I'd been starting and stopping them since I was 11.
Hmm. Was it always going to be comics? Like, what was it about comics that drew you to that medium?
It originally it started there as a kid because I didn't know that like you could get a job doing art. I just thought you either are a painter or that's it, you are just that. And then sometime in high school it occurred to me that human beings make animated films. And so I went to college for animation,
Hmm.
but again that same issue of you really do need a team unless that's all I want to do. And I just am not that good of an animator. I'm not that dedicated, I guess. So I always have loved sequential. So this was my way of I can do this on my own. I can still go outside, and I don't need to be a sound designer. So these are the major things for that.
I love that. Were you raised on comics? Like, were you reading a lot as a kid, reading comics, or no?
No, I didn't know because I don't really like big two like superheroes. I just don't. I can't. I can't care about it. Good for like, that's it. It's just not for me. And I didn't know there was anything else until I was in college, until I like wandered into the school library and pulled out like a Judge Dredd compendium, and I was like, wait, there is more. And then I really dove into, I really fell in love with I think the current ones were like Andrew McLean, Simon Roy, and James Ticot. I think were three that I was like, okay, I think I need to get into this more.
I love that because usually when I ask people that, they're like, "Oh, I was raised on comics," and I wasn't either. I
No,
didn't like those comics or superheroes. I still don't like superheroes. So
no.
hearing that someone else who's gotten has gotten as far as you have didn't like that as well, I love it. I'd love to hear that. So then, what was your first like? You mentioned how you had been writing comics, but you didn't really finish your first until
Mm.
you were 20. What were your early attempts to make comics like? Like, how were you engaging with your creativity?
They were way goofier. So I think in person I joke around a lot. If most people that know me, I'm not very serious in person. But now my current writing, I really don't joke around a lot. But when I was younger, it was just like frantic stream of consciousness, like jokes. I have them not here somewhere. I have like I found them in the little Ziploc bag I kept all my comics in, and it's like an acorn person that's fighting giant worms, and all instead of going to therapy. Like that was what I was up to. And then when I got to high school, I was still like noodling away at it, but I used to draw a lot more like regular show style. Not nearly as good, but that was the look I was trying. And I really don't think any of that's left in how I draw it now, but it was not at all what I like doing now.
So when did you transition to, you mentioned there was a part where you realized people do this for a living. So was that sort of like the launching point of, oh, that's what I have to do from now on?
I think so. I was on a bus to New York City just like to go with a friend. We were just gonna visit New York for the weekend. And we were sitting talking about I used to always listen to music and picture what movie it would like what soundtrack or what it would be the soundtrack to. And then something was happening and she said something about animators as people. And I was like, oh my God, that's right. Like that's a job. And then we had a I don't know if any if your high school had something called like Mr. whatever your town's from, like a male pageant basically. So we had that and I did it. And I animated something using just stringing together GIFs that I would make from Photoshop because our computer lab teacher told me that there's no animation software. There was and there is. But she said no, that doesn't exist. You don't know what you're talking about. Meanwhile, it was on the computers. So I did it in the most roundabout way possible. And then the school required me to have some sort of live section of it. So I had to voice all of the characters live in time too. So I was just sitting there watching. And so that was my like foray into it. And then I had already been, I was going to college. I went to I went to Lesley University. It basically at eight Art Institute of Boston. So Art Institute became that. And I went to a school that I knew had art near it, but I didn't go in for art. I went in, I think undecided or whatever you call that. And a semester in, immediately was like, I need to do this. I'm gonna switch to animation. I convinced my parents because it's an actual job that you get hired and that is your job. And so they said okay. And that's how I started it.
I love that. So did you have, I mean, I feel like I know the answer to this already because none of us do, but did you have a plan whenever you went into this? Like, did you know what you were going to do with your art or how to get out there?
Hell no. I didn't even know how to draw. I didn't even know how to make a finished drawing, but I didn't know how to use a scanner like that. But I had hoped and dreamed. I was like, I would love to make my own show, as everyone, that wants to make something. They want to make their own thing. So that was my nebulous hope.
Hmm. So even hearing that story, it ties really well into one of the big subjects that I wanted to talk to you about, which is creating your own opportunities. Like the way you had a teacher tell you animation software doesn't exist, so you went ahead and did it anyway. So, you know, have you always seen yourself as like creating opportunities for yourself? I mean, whenever I say that, does that sound like something that you think, yeah, I am pretty good at that?
I I sort of feel weird. I feel like when I hear that, I think, is it okay if I swear? Like not badly, but I
Please.
just I'm like, I don't want to be an ass. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, I don't feel like I guess I am by virtue of that I am still doing this and
Mhm.
I'm not hemorrhaging money doing it. So I guess so. But it just feels weird and I didn't think about it. But I come from like my dad worked as a mechanic and then he would also take side jobs. And then my grandfather before that had like four jobs
Mhm.
too, where he was teaching women how to drive because that was when they were allowed to start driving again, or not again, but then. He was like a DJ, he was a cab driver, and I think even though I don't like getting my hands dirty, unlike my dad and my grandfather, but I think I picked up that just if you like something, just you do it. And my dad used to draw for me where I said I started drawing Pokemon and animals. My dad I used to ask him to draw them for me. And then he'd go, you're pretty good. You should do it, which is probably him just not wanting to do it anymore. But I'm glad he did it. And so I guess I have always been just making it because what else am I gonna do?
I love that. So I want to start with talking about how you've built a readership for yourself, and you've done it through, I mean, again, through creating stuff for yourself. So I want to ask you, like, as far as building that readership goes, when do you feel like that sort of started to pick up momentum? Was there like a launching point or a moment where you were like, oh, like this is getting kind of serious?
I don't It's tough to gauge. I think it might have been around a little sooner than I thought because I'd been working on Gardner on and off mostly. So my first like full length book was called Gardner, a big sci-fi book, and I was scared to do it. I've been talking to a lot of my friends like Marie Anger, who they've done a lot of Kickstarter stuff, and I'd befriended them from meeting them at a convention before that, and I was just like, I don't think I can get people to give me $10,000. Like I was like, I don't have $10,000. I don't know what that looks like. And Marie was one of the people to really push me to like do it because you're there. But I think before that, that was I think 2020 was I think the first time I used Kickstarter. But before that, I'd been just working on and off. So I built an audience online that I'd gone to a bunch of conventions. Like I travel, I still do, and so I think I had it. It sort of crept up on me. I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
It does. And you were getting to my next question, which was
Okay.
what were you kind of doing to get yourself? Because I mean, you can trust readers will find you. They don't always find you though. So how are you getting out there to meet people, or were they just finding you?
I think the main thing is Instagram at that time in like 20 2016 to 20, I don't know, 19 was different than what it is now. And I started when I was in late college. I graduated 2017. I started doing there's a couple different like monthly drawing clubs and things or weekly drawing clubs. So I started doing those, and that I think built a bit of an audience where I had like a couple thousand followers out of college. And then I think that was a great, like, once social media is kind of this weird vicious thing of once you get numbers, you get not like you don't get anyone seeing it unless people are seeing it, which is doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
But I think I just got very lucky in terms of getting some visibility at a time when it could still be a little more easily organic than what it's kind of shifted to, or without also having to like be a really pretty person and make my process and take videos that look nice. I'm not, I can't do that.
Are you doing anything different now to market yourself? Anything to sort of stay, or is it? I mean, at this point, you have a big enough following that maybe it is just a matter of just keeping consistent content up. But is there anything else you're doing?
I think it's that I've been every now and again, I don't know if it means anything, but every now and again I've been taking videos and stuff. I think especially like that I print some of my own books. I think some people uh wouldn't know. I didn't know. I wish I knew it sooner. So just to see, even if someone can see a video of me pressing a button and go, oh, I could press a button at my home and print my comics. So I think doing a bit of that, and that's it. I think I've been taking more leaps of traveling further because I can sort of, I have more things, I have more books, I have a larger, I'm not just trying to sell one $5 book to make up the cost of flying across the country anymore. So I think it's just grown a little in that way that things grow over time, but nothing, I haven't been trying to reinvent the wheel for better or worse yet.
Why not? I mean, it's working. So I want to talk to you about crowdfunding, since
Mhm.
this is something that you do frequently, you do very successfully as well. I mean, I first found you because that Council of the Frogs thing was going around, and then that led to a rabbit hole of seeing all the other great things you've done. And now I'm a fan for life. So it's clearly working. So I'm wondering, first off, why you chose the. I mean, it sounds like you were advised to go this way, but had you considered other routes into publishing?
I pitched a bunch of stuff before that. So I finished the first book I did, um, called Home. I scrapped. I got 90 pages in when I was in college, and then I sent it to Image. I was like, cool. So I'll just send that to Image. It'll get picked up, and then I'm a comics artist. And then I never heard back because that's that. Of course, why would I? And it's not good. It wasn't a good book. Uh, so I realized that it takes a long time to even get a no, if you even get a no at all. And then uh, deals vary depending on who you are and where the industry is at in terms of it being a job. And so I realized pretty quickly after that that I still wanted to make books. I didn't really care. I wanted to get a publisher. So I was like, well, I'll keep putting stuff out and then maybe they'll see me and then they'll take that. And that never happened. And I still just kept making stuff. So it was make whatever I can within my means. And as I kept going to more events and things, I keep meeting people. Some people do great. Some people love direct market. Yeah, I guess direct market, like mainstream publishing. Some people love that. It treats them very well. They fit perfectly for that. I don't think I'm built for that in that same way because I'm too antsy to sit around for 6 months to get we love it, but no, or we love it, but what if it was not at all what you wanted to do? And or the we love it, but what if the pay isn't enough? So I've talked to some other friends of mine that crowdfund, and it depends on, some people can work quicker than others too.
Mhm.
And I've been so used to it, and fingers crossed it's working. So I don't know that the numbers are different for me. So I guess it doesn't matter if I'm selling tens of thousands of copies of books through the direct market or if I'm selling far less of a volume, but where that money goes to me instead of a publisher.
Mm. I love that. I love that yeah, again, to tie that back to creating for yourself, like that's something that we don't see enough of. So I'm glad to hear that it works for people. And I want to ask you more about sort of just the process
Yeah.
of crowdfunding. My exact question was, how are you so good at it? So let's start with that.
I
Let's just
think
start with that.
I think I am on a very high luck playthrough of life. So I think it's partly that. But other than that, I think Kickstarter has very good retention. And from what it seems, people remember if you deliver what you said you were going to. And so my advice is always start small. I had one of the two professors I really valued from my college experience. I told him, I'm gonna make Gardner, I'm gonna make this big graphic novel as soon as I get out of college. And he just said, okay, I believe you, sort of. Stop. And he, what was the metaphor? He said, I know you can make a song, but I don't know that you can make an album yet. So why don't you make a bunch of songs? And that was a very helpful way for me to conceptualize it because I can practice. You can practice starting and finishing something within your means, whether it's 7 pages, 20 pages, whatever. You can make something that's contained, and then it gives you that satisfaction that I finished something. Because I couldn't enjoy Gardner till I finished it, and that was, I will not do a 200-page book again if I can help it. And I think so. My first Kickstarter was a very small anthology. It was 53 pages, and I only drew 13 of them. Two other friends of mine did a story each. So we all got together, and that way we could make a bigger book, feel like we've made the biggest book we've ever made, and not go crazy because we had day jobs and other, like, comics wasn't even close to paying any bills other than hopefully feeding itself at that time. And we did that. It came out, people were really happy, and then just make the next one. Kickstarter is really, and other crowdfunding platforms, I'm curious to see where that growth goes. I think the same will probably happen there as time progresses, but they have the benefit of you're reaching a different audience, and they'll stay. If you make something good, they'll stay.
How many crowdfunders have you done at this point?
5 or 6. Weird Features, Tiger. I'm gonna do the list of, it's not exciting listening, but Weird Features, Tiger Dyer, Gardner, 2, 5.
Okay.
5.
And have they all been funded? I assume
Yes.
so.
I
So-
set, oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
So at first, when the first one I did, again, the idea of getting anybody to give me an amount of money within an amount of time sounded terrifying. So we set it to, I think it was like $2,500. The three of us said, hey, if it gets that much, we don't mind going out of pocket to finish the rest of the costs for printing. And then we hit it, and then it kept going, and that was amazing. Just it still ended up that we broke even on print costs and everything, but that was always the greatest expectation we had. So I think it was a lot of early on setting it to, here's the bare minimum, because I'm not paying myself to do this stuff. I just want to do it. So this pays to get it done. Where, the, like, Dagger was a bigger group effort, where a lot of artists, we were all just saying, we just want to make something. So that was, sorry, the second Kickstarter I did was Dagger, which was an anthology that I put together with 15 people total. I should know this by now, but so it was very much like, all right, let's just throw out a number and I'll handle printing it. That's fine. That'll cover print costs. And everyone was very down to just, we'll make a book. If it makes extra money, we all split it even, all hands in, go team, great. And it did wait. I think we set a goal of maybe 7,500. And I think it ended at around 30 something thousand, which all that went to everybody. By the end of it, I, through learning experiences, ended up in the black for myself personally, but it worked out. I was happy with that. And so it's just, yeah, just figuring out what's the number that you need to get it done.
And then what sort of, especially for those early stages, what sort of strategy were you employing to get the word? I mean, we've had a lot of people on here talk about, the pre-planning and the adjusting, and there are so many pieces of it. So what did you know to do, and what did you learn along the way?
I don't, I do know. I think you have to, sometimes people just go straight to launch, and Kickstarter has its own market. There are people that shop it the same way people shop online anywhere else. So it'll pop up more if you actually take the time to do a pre-launch page. I think that is a very important thing. Pre-launch page, and talk about it. Social media keeps getting harder and harder to promote things, but do it. Have a newsletter. I barely use my own, but I have one. Anything, because if people want to find your stuff, they will sign up for it, and then you hopefully won't hit them with too much spam. But I think definitely tell people, and I think I'm so all over the place, but I think the most helpful thing for me is, for my standalone books, especially for just Gardner and the Council of Frogs, were really the only books that were just me that I've kickstarted. I've been talking about those books. I'd been talking about them for a year plus before doing a Kickstarter. So I think that was a natural, I guess, an organic marketing is like what I think you would call it. So it's just prep. You can't suddenly show up and say, hey, I have this book. You have 30 days to get. You start by just sharing things from it.
Do you, because I was going to ask you what the different approach was, because when you're doing an anthology, you can rely on everyone else in it to promote it as well. When you go to your own stuff, it's you. So what changed going to a solo project versus doing an anthology?
I think just that, just kind of communicating with everybody. It was less communication because I got to stay in my head and send less emails, I guess. I I'm so used to just banging on the drum, like talking about things anyway. So it wasn't really different,
Hmm.
actually. It was just me showing more of my own work and worrying less about, is this going to be worth it for the other people involved? I didn't have to stress about, am I going to let them down?
Sure. At this point, I feel like, do you feel like when you go into a project that you can just assume it's going to get funded at this point? Like, is there a
I
security
will
now?
never. I you always hope, but I'm now getting to the point where I'm probably going to be setting goals. I used to set them a little lower because I was like, well, I would get this done. I will go out of pocket for the rest. But now I'm willing to risk. I think I've done enough that I could get this. So I'll be like, okay, so I can set X aside that would actually be to pay myself rather than just pay for the print run and all the costs of doing this.
Hmm.
But I will always fear that it will not work.
As all creatives do, we
Yes,
we
yeah.
always doubt it.
Yeah. A
So
healthy
I,
dose of skepticism.
right. I want to shift gears a little bit, although it's
Mhm.
still on topic, but I have to give Noel credit for this line. He mentioned how you are so good about turning creativity into a business. And I think that's sort of what I want to talk to you about, because that's something like, it's just a completely different side of things for creatives. Like, we create the product, and I hate to even call it a product. We create the
I
art.
know, but you
And
have
then,
to.
yeah, you have to see it as a product. So was that an easy, had you always seen it that way, or was it an acquired thing?
I don't I don't know when I think it switched when I started going to conventions,
Hmm.
trying to sell a book on just the virtue of it's a comic and I'm going to a Comic Con, and then why can't I make the table money back?
Hmm.
And I realized quickly, if it's just me alone, I have to really do something else to convince people to care about it, or just do something else that will feed this until then. Because I I love making comics and I'll always make them, but it is, of all the art that I do, it's the most labor intensive. And then like the cost ratios, I don't think about it too deeply. It is not the same as, it took me a couple hours and I got a t-shirt design versus a couple years and I've got a book. And so I up until I moved last year, also worked at a screen print shop. So that was my into making more things and learning more about that. So that was really, I think, where I picked up on making a product out of my work. I hope that does that answer that?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I
and to you're no, you're that was very, very informative. To segue from there too, sticking with the business side of things, I think your, like, on second at best press there, your shop is a very great example of a shop that has like cool stuff. So I'm wondering, like, when has that always been attached to your creative side? Like, as long as you've been making books, you've had that side of it as well.
Yeah. So I always liked, I used to grow up listening to like um post-hardcore, like, oh God, I can't remember any of the bands, but Dance Gavin Dance, like all that stuff.
Mhm.
And I would love going to concerts. I love the t-shirts. I loved art. So I was like, oh, I would always buy a band shirt because, it's a great way to support a band. And then I used to go, oh, I want to do band shirts. I want to do that stuff. And every artist and their mother at some point has the idea of, what if I started a brand? And and so I had always been like, what if I started a brand? And immediately in my head, I knew I would call it Second at Best because I loved to be really self-deprecating. And then I was screen printing. I started out by screen printing, like hand painting on like really, really awful screens from like Michaels and Blick and whatever. And I was screening printing shirts on the floor of my dorm room in college. And I just wanted to make stuff. So I always knew that. And as it changed, I was like, okay, I still really like this brand. I didn't want to use the name like Matt Emmons Art because the other Matt Emmons is an Olympic marksman. So I'm fighting SEO on that already. So I was like, I'd rather have an be some sort of thing than just my name.
I want to dig deeper there too, because you brought up the word that I always bring up, but I didn't get a chance to yet, which is brand. Because as creatives, we, you know, you often hear you have to have a brand, you have to know your brand, you have to establish your brand, all these things about brand. It sounds like that came pretty intuitively to you. Like, do you feel like you understood your brand as a
No.
creative?
I think people get really caught up in like, oh, I want a style, I want a brand. That'll show up more likely than not because art is unfortunately super nonlinear. What worked for me, I don't think I could do it again. I don't think the conditions were there in the same way. And so it's constantly shifting. So I don't think people should worry too much. It comes out. It just take a step back every few months and look at what do I keep going back to? What do I keep drawing? Or what kind of stories do I keep telling? Or what colors am I using? And stuff like that, I think will inform. Like, I didn't plan to be drawing frogs, or like, I actually didn't think I'd have a fantasy book in me at all. And now I'm going to do another one. And so I think just the brand is just like, what do you like? And hopefully you can find a way to curb it. There's an audience for everything, but it shows if you are doing it because you like it. When you talk to people in person, when they ask you what this thing is, they're going to care more when you care.
I do think, you know, of your many other strengths that I think you have a very good concept of packaging your products. Like whenever I look at your synopsis of your books, where you're able to summarize them in like a sentence or two, that's a gift
Took a
because
very
most
long time.
well, nobody needs to know that because it's working.
I love being honest, but yeah.
So I do want to put you on the spot a little bit and see if I asked you to describe your brand as succinctly as possible, what would you say?
I think I'm I'm really interested in a type of work that everything is a little rundown, a little ruined, a little ragged, but it's more hopeful. I'm not doing like those gritty, grim, dark type settings. The settings are on paper like that. They're awful, but everyone's trying to make more of themselves in those places. And so I think the that's my brand.
I love that. Yeah, that's perfect. Let's see here. Let's segue a bit into your process, your creative process a bit. I thought it was interesting, and this might just be semantics, but you in your bio you mentioned you're an artist and illustrator, but not a writer as well. Do you still identify as a writer? I mean, again, maybe semantics, but I'm just
That's a no,
curious
that's a
here.
good question. I never have because
Mm,
I try every now and again. I get the urge to just write prose, and then I can't finish it, and so it just sits there.
mm.
And I also I just can't write without drawing, but I also can't draw without writing, if that makes sense. So anything I draw, there's a story, there's an intent. I have some idea of what this character, the setting, or something is about. But
And,
yeah,
and
I would never say I'm a writer.
That's so interesting. And we're gonna spend some time here, but I want to start with just sort of the process of developing a script. Then for you, do you write yourself a script, or you just dive right into the panels?
I wrote my first script for Gardner when I finished it, and I had to send it to Bernardo to letter. I had to reverse engineer a script out of my own. I write um finger quotes write uh throw a light on in a second, but I thumbnail everything. So I don't know if this is legible
Mhm.
at all, but this is the closest to a script that I really have, where I thumb everything out, and then I usually have I know, like point A to point B, I know what I'm doing with that. And then I think I'll throw there's a couple pieces of dialogue that I have pre-written that I know I want.
Mm.
And then I go in as I draw it and write it either in frantic notes on my phone or in Google Docs or both, or like on a piece of paper that I lose. So I didn't sit to write a script until having to work with someone else.
That's crazy. So you touched on something that I wanted to get to as well, which is dialogue, especially because I mean, you look at stories like Parent, most of your stories don't have much dialogue, and that's crazy to me. Like I'm somebody who I get uncomfortable whenever I don't have dialogue. So I'm curious if that's always been the case with you. How are you so what's the word? So good at just telling a story visually without the need for much communication?
The real reason I didn't use a lot of dialogue in early stuff is because I couldn't afford to pay a letterer,
Mm.
and I couldn't do good lettering myself. So I I knew I could write a story and then just have no dialogue. And it was really great practice on making sure it's clear, because if there's no dialogue to explain what's happening, I really needed to make sure the drawings were clear. I'm far from a perfect artist, but it's still, beat by beat. Okay, I can understand what's going on in these panels. And I still try to carry that. I'm not again an issue that I see in superhero comics and stuff. Like too many words. I'm looking at pictures here. I love reading prose books, but those are over here and then comics are over here. I want the art to sit there more. And I think I come from the background of a lot more of showing versus telling things. So I love a story that doesn't explain everything, where it's only if it's plot route. Like Wood in Gardner, there's a bunch of things I just don't talk about because those characters wouldn't, they don't care about that. They don't care about like the politics of like one side of this planet, even though I've thought of it and I know it exists, but there's no reason like certain things would come up. So I don't give that. I think that's where like some more like dialogue heavy stuff would come in. But I choose to tone back from that at first because I was horrible at lettering, and I'm not winning any awards for lettering anytime soon, but I'm going to keep getting better. I'm going to keep learning, I should say.
You said something I want to get back to, but there's a question that I wanted to ask from the audience about writing as you draw. They said, how do you manage pacing your story if you're writing as you draw?
I thumb it all out first. So I have these tiny, like those little sketches. I'll do that for the entire book first, or chapter by chapter, depending on the size. So I know how it ends, more or less. It's just I'll be adjusting, if I say, okay, this is a 24-page story, here's my whole thing. As I'm going, I get to I have my set, these are the really big moments. Those are written, finger quotes, written somewhere. But I like to keep it free because sometimes I think of something better as it goes, or I go, that doesn't make sense. I change things around until it's done. So hopefully, I also, maybe my pacing is a mess. I don't know.
You had mentioned knowing, like specifically knowing the politics on like the other side of a planet. I'm curious that whenever you set out to write a story, how much do you know about the story before you like? Is it pretty much a complete story in your mind? You know where it goes. You just have to do it.
Usually very little.
Mm.
I'll use Gardner because that's the one that's done. Um, I Lars, like the main character of that book, when I started it, or when I started coming up with the idea for it, she was not even a character.
Mm.
I just drew her for fun once as a random drawing, and I was like, what if she was like, it started out where she had a nose piercing, and then I just stopped drawing the nose piercing and gave her the scars, and that became a plot point. And that's, so it's very whatever I'm thinking at the time. And I guess for the frog book too, even, I know that one, I knew I wanted to do a story about little frogs. I knew they had a lich as their father, but I didn't know what the rest of it was going to be right away. It slowly turned into what it is.
That's fascinating. And then you mentioned character too, which is something else I wanted to ask you about. Again, I'm using this whole example of, since you don't use much dialogue, I'm curious what your process then is for developing characters when speaking from personal experience, dialogue defines a character most times. So what is your process like whenever you're creating a character? What does it start with?
It usually starts, I have like 10 gigs of photos just saved in my phone because I need that definitely. And so I'm just constantly saving images, screenshotting things, taking photos of things I see where I like that, like I have this issue a lot of times where I see like really funky clothes and I have to process in my head, do I like that? Do I want to wear that? Or do I just like that character design wise? And so it starts there and then I'll just kind of noodle away. I try to carve out, I'm very few and far between now, but just days where I sit and I just draw for fun, which is very rare, unfortunately now. But I sit and just draw in my sketchbook. I don't care what it looks like. It's most of the time stuff I'm never gonna post, stuff I'm never gonna clean. It's just for me. And from that is where a lot of characters will spill from, where like the frog started as that. I had been really burnt out from I was supposed to do card art for the Dune game. It was a re-release to pair with the movie. Licensed work can be frustrating to say the least. And at the end of it, the game didn't even happen. So I got all this stress and burnout for not for nothing, but for no, I didn't get to share. I didn't get to have that out in the world. And I just drew this little frog just looking sad. I was like, yeah, that's how I feel right now. And people clicked with it. I clicked with it more importantly than I guess for me. So I think it's very every character I make, if I try to set out and make something cool, I won't. It has to be a year later I'll finally make it. Like Bug from Gardner took me 6 months. I figured out how I liked him 6 months later. Um, the creature Golkin in the Council of Frogs, he started as a D&D character that I played in a campaign, and I'd been drawing him for the full year that we were playing that campaign, and every time I thought he looked terrible until suddenly I was like, that's almost it. I'm almost there. So it's very much just key. I just like to give myself enough time because I think if I try to come up with a character very quickly in to put in a book, I'm gonna regret how they look and maybe be missing out on some of the characterization I'd like to give them later when I haven't spent as much time just thinking about them, I guess.
So when does a character become a story? Like when do you see a character enough that you're like, okay, I'm ready to tell this character's story?
I think that one's tough because there's never like a set time.
Mm.
It's just suddenly sometimes I have them tucked away and suddenly, oh, okay, there you like the I have a warlock that's in the Council of Frogs book, and he was actually a character I came up with 2 years before I even drew a frog, before I even thought of the frog book. And I couldn't figure him out on his own. I just didn't think he was ready to be a main character. And then, fast forward two years later, I'm like, oh, this frog would need to find like a wizard or a warlock or something. And I'm like, I don't want this bearded classic. I'm like, what if he's this weird, what if it's that guy living in his oil refinery tower like wizards do or whatever? So I think it's very just I keep them kind of in my sketchbooks or my pocket until something clicks. But there's never sometimes it never does. I have some characters I made that I love, and I just don't know where to put them.
Gotcha. And then this seems like a good time because I was going to ask about inspiration. And somebody had
Hmm.
asked in the Q&A about what are ways to gain inspiration in writing comics. So it seems like a good time to throw that at you.
Hmm. I think writing like what always inspires me is usually when I read something, watch something, when I see something I loved. Like I just read The Postman, like
Mm.
the terrible movie, much better book. I just read that and I couldn't sleep from how excited that book made me. So I think just like trying to carve out time for yourself to one enjoy other things and take what you want from that, but then also to just make stuff for you. Don't ever try to make it, don't start making it, at least in my experience, don't start making it assuming you're going to show anybody this. Just make it. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it goes nowhere. And that is frustrating. But when it works, it works.
And then I'm curious, it sounds like, there's no real rhyme or reason to when a story begins for you, but is character usually your entry point? Is it like, oh, this is the character whose story needs to be told, or is it sometimes plot or setting, or what is usually your entry point for a story?
It's always character for me because I think I don't really like writing stories about like plot without, it's usually about who it's about. Whoever that is, it's their world where, yeah, there's, it's never they're gonna save the world. It's they're doing something within their life. And so I think it always starts with a character.
Hmm. And then there was something else I wanted to ask you about process. There's this quote that I love for writers, which is that every sentence's job is to get the reader to read the next sentence. And I wonder if it's similar. I wonder what the translation is for somebody like you who doesn't rely so much on the writing but the art. Do you feel like every panel therefore has like the objective of making the reader continue, or the reader continue going?
Sometimes I think, unfortunately, not all panels, at least not unless there's a few people who everything they draw are just perfect. I'm not there, but some panels are transitional. Some, like, not all panels will be the one, but I think it's just like pacing, where even in your paneling you're just getting to this point where to get to a drawing that really obviously never phone it in on, try your best all the time, but there's some that are just going to be stronger, some, because how often can a panel of just a character's face be super engaging? It's necessary, but is it like, whoa, that panel changed my life? It's like, no, the reveal page, like there's certain moments that are definitely going to be stronger, but you need those other smaller moments to lead there. But I think in prose, if you don't like the sentences, you're going to put the book down. Comics, you can kind of like, you can be like, do I like, you can flip through and be like, oh, that's a cool one, I got to get there, and then you go back. So it's a little more forgiving than a book.
Mm, that's very true. Another question here from the audience. I'm a
Mhm.
novelist who has always been obsessed with comics. Do you feel like there is an overlap between prose writing and what you do with your comics?
For me, no. I think there can be sometimes, but I don't. The more I draw, the worse I get at writing, because I get frustrated and go, well, I could just draw that scene instead of writing it. But it can really help, to where I actually got this from also like playing D&D and like DMing campaigns and stuff like that, where thinking about different sensory things can help, where comics, you kind of can't use certain ones. Every time I write prose, even though I never finish it and send it anywhere, there's I like to talk about what you hear and what you smell in that setting, versus comics are a visual medium, so you can show a lot more in that way. So I feel like they're pretty different.
Sure. And then I have to ask, because it's great hearing about your inspiration, the way you get into stories. I'm curious why, like you and robot. There's so many robots. I'm just wondering, is it funner to draw? What is your fascination with robots?
I didn't like drawing people. Was that, and I do like robots. So I both. I weirdly feel like I go through phases where I've got, I think, three, technically four robot stories, but I did all of those within a certain amount of time. And then I moved, like, now this is my fantasy year where the Council of Frogs, and then I have another book that's a fantasy book, and then I'm gonna do another one. And I sort of just like jump around in moods. And so it started, I just didn't want to draw people. And I always like these non-humanoid things. Like I growing up seeing like Star Wars, like the Gonk droid was infinitely more interesting to me than like the main characters. I'm like, I don't care that deeply about that. And so I always wanted to make stories that were about those figures, where they weren't just evil, where they weren't just like the monster.
I like how simple you make things sound like, well, that's just what I'm interested in. And then, like,
I think
that's the best answer.
I
That's
think
just what I wanted to do.
that's the whole point of it's. So art can be selfish. I'm pretty selfish about it. It's just make what you want to make. It's going to
Mhm,
be the strongest thing you can make. I've always felt.
mhm. So the future, it sounds like you're planning a few projects down the road. Is that usual for you? 'Cause I know for most creatives, it's like, let me get through this project, then I'll worry about everything else. But you've got a few in mind.
Out of sheer anxiety, I'm thinking of everything at once. So I plan to especially now, like doing this on my own, I kind of have to structure it in that way
Mhm,
where I'm not very like far along in any of them yet, but I have plan. Okay, it's just me slowly piecing together in my notes and little thumbnail sketches and things. Here's what I'm going to do next. Here's a half-formed thought that in 2 years I'll be able to do. It's a lot of not concrete stuff, but then I'll pick one from that frantic mess and say, okay, this is the one that I'm actually going to make concrete next year.
and these are all, I presume you're going to go the crowdfunding route with all of these. Do you have any thoughts of going elsewhere in the future?
My first series with a publisher will actually be out later this year. So it's a 4 issue miniseries. So that will be out later, but I still just don't I'm too I don't know if it's lazy, but I'm not doing the pitching project or the pitching process. So one of them I'm not doing crowdfunding. I'm just releasing it, but because I can print it on this thing. So I'm gonna continue the Opossum book, those that inherit the earth, just sort of as like a like episodic kind of whatever I
Mhm.
feel like at the time. So it'll be self-contained each time if I can help it. And that's a smaller thing to bite off. And then I'm losing track. Oh yeah, and then larger stories. I'm sorry, I'm so scatterbrained. Larger stories. I plan to take one to Kickstarter next year. I just have to decide which one.
Sure. And then another question here from the audience, which is a great one, which was what I was going to ask next too, which is what are your future aspirations in comics? What are you hoping to do down the road?
I just hope I can keep making them. That's it. And my secret one, I don't care too deeply about IP things. I just don't. But part of me really wants to self-publish, get the license to Tremors and do a Tremors. I don't think it'll ever happen, but that's my unrealistic half-formed hope.
You could always wait till it becomes public domain, like
I
Winnie the
I
Pooh. I mean, we had
I
that
don't
horror
think I'll live
movie.
that long. I think it's like a big window.
I think it's like 100 years, but it was an older movie. Maybe there's hope for
It's
that.
like 95.
Oh, was that new? Never mind. Forget what I said.
Maybe it's a 90. If
You're
I
right.
I will if I live to be that old, maybe that'll be the thing I die doing. I'll face down in a public domain Tremors book.
I think you're the first guest who we've ever gotten all the way to the end of the life goals, like the total end of the road. So thank you. So then I just want to ask you, this is your time to promote things. Like what's coming out? Where can people find you online? What do you want to anything you want to throw out there?
You can find me on Instagram at second at best with periods in between all of those because shout out to a band that's been inactive since 2014 that stole the full second at best. And then second at best with an underscore at the end of it on Twitter because that same band. Thank you. Or secondatbestpress.com is easier to remember, I suppose. So those are the three main things. Um, I'm doing too many conventions. I'm going to be at Brooklyn Comic Con. Fan Expo Philly, which is closer. Um, a bunch of things. I try to list them on my website as well, and I should post about them more. But yeah, those are those.
Any books you want to promote? Anything that people can find? Don't be shy.
I'm mid I'm mid printing a reprint of Those That Inherit the Earth, so I
Mm.
still have another 1,200 pages or so to print, but I'm almost done in a way. So
That's
that's my
great.
main thing.
So you print them all and put them together and do I didn't realize that. I would have
Yeah.
asked more questions about that. So you do the whole thing at
Yeah,
home.
all the short ones I do. I print all the risograph ones I print here on my Riso at home.
Wow, that's incredible. All right, yeah, part two needed, thank you. No.
Yeah, separate one about just about Riso, which I know very little about.
All right, well, Matt, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here. You were awesome to talk to. Your answers were so succinct that you
I'm
answered so many segues before I could ask them. So you did great. Thank you.
I'm glad it made sense. I was pretty sure I was rambling, but I'm glad.
Of course. So to all of our listeners, we'll have this recording up on Wednesday, and you can join us in 2 weeks. Negativespacecomics.com/events, and we will see you then.